"By George, you're right," exclaimed Grandpa, shading his eyes with his hand. "Grandpa, I can see the aviator. It's the person who flies the car," cried Emily ecstatically, and she could. She could see his brown leather jacket and helmet, and even his goggles. What an exciting morning this was! She waved frantically. The man in the airplane waved to her over the side of the cockpit. It was almost too much to bear. She had been waved at by an aviator. "Grandpa, he waved!" Emily could hardly believe it. She stood watching until the airplane disappeared in the distance. Then she climbed into the Ford and slammed the door. The things she had to tell Mama. Emily and her grandfather were not even near the first gate when Grandpa began to work the clutch pedal up and down. It seemed lifeless under his foot. "Grandpa!" Emily was alarmed. Great Scott! Grandpa was alarmed too. Now what the Sam Hill was it George A. said to do in a case like this? He pumped the clutch once more before it came to him. He said if this ever happened, I'd better not stop, because I couldn't get started again unless I was on a hill. "Then don't stop," begged Emily. Right here, all the hills were in the distance, where they could do no good. "We're coming to the gate," yelled Grandpa. "You can't stop," shouted Emily. The gate seemed to be flying toward her. "Grandpa, don't stop. I've got to," yelled Grandpa. "No," shrieked Emily. "We'll never get home." My goodness, if she didn't get home, Mama would worry, and she would never get to go for a ride again. Just when Emily thought they were going to crash into the gate, Grandpa turned aside, and his automobile went bounding around in his alfalfa crop. Grandpa drove around and around in a circle. "It's no use, Emily," he said. "I'll have to stop. There's nothing else to do. We can hike to the nearest farm and get a farmer with a team to tow us back to town." "No, wait, Grandpa," begged Emily. "Be towed back to town behind old-fashioned horses? I should say not. Grandpa and his wonderful new automobile would be the laughing-stock of Pitchfork. Besides, it would take all morning or longer, and Emily was very anxious not to worry Mama. "If you drive real slow," she suggested, "I could jump out and open the gate." "Emily, you might get hurt," protested Grandpa. "No, I won't," Emily assured him. "I'll be careful." "I guess I could see how slow I can drive." Grandpa sounded dubious, which means uncertain, but he was not eager to be towed back by horses either. He was proud of his Ford and wanted to ride back in style. They slowed down until they were bouncing gently over the ruts. Emily held her breath for fear the engine might stop altogether, and there they would be, out in the middle of an alfalfa field, miles from nowhere. "You're sure you can do it?" asked Grandpa. "I'm sure." Emily laid her bouquet of columbine on the seat. She opened the door and looked down. The ground was passing by faster than she had expected. She took a deep breath and jumped. She stumbled and fell, skinning her knee. Never mind. It was a half-sock weather, and her knee would heal. "I'm all right," she called out. And while Grandpa speeded up and went on driving in circles through the alfalfa, she ran to the gate, climbed up, and lifted off the ring of wire that secured it to the fence. She pushed off the one foot, and riding the gate, she swung out across the road. If she had not been so worried, it would have been fun. Swinging on gates was forbidden at home. Grandpa drove through the gate and started going around in circles in the next field. Emily hopped off the gate before the dust had settled and pushed and shoved until it was closed once more. She slipped the circle of wire back in the place and ran after the Ford. She had worked fast because this field of wheat did not belong to Grandpa, and the farmer who owned it might not like Grandpa driving around on his crop. Emily was glad it was a field of wheat and not a prune orchard. Grandpa would have had a terrible time if he had to drive in circles through an orchard. Grandpa slowed down until Emily was afraid the engine would stop. She grabbed the edge of the Ford beside the seat cushion and pulled herself up on the running board. And she flopped into the seat. Whew! She had made it. "Good work, Emily," said Grandpa, and drove in a straight line down the road once more. Emily leaned back and concentrated on catching her breath before the next gate. If she had done it once, she could do it again. She had to, or be towed back by horses. At the second gate, Grandpa began to circle once more. Emily opened the door. For an instant, glad that Mama could not see her now, and leaped bravely through the air. She stumbled again, but managed not to fall. She must be getting the hang of it. Once more, she slipped off the wire hoop. This gate creaked, and Emily could not ride it. She had to shove. Grandpa straightened out his driving and went through. Emily tried not to breathe dust while she struggled to close the gate, and Grandpa circled through the oats until she could scramble aboard. Whew! That was hard work. Emily hoped she had enough strength left for the third and last gate. That gate was in view of some farm buildings. Grandpa circled slowly. Emily took a deep breath and leaped. Yes, she did seem to have the hang of it, because she landed on her feet. She ran to the gate, unfastened it, tried to pull it open. It still would not budge. Desperately, Emily shoved. What if Grandpa ran out of gas while he was circling around? "Can you lift it up, Emily?" Grandpa yelled as he drove past. Emily lifted. The gate budged, but that was all. Emily lifted again and managed to get the gate partway open, but not enough for an automobile to pass through. She wondered if it would be too selfish to ask God to help her in this one little thing. "Don't stop, Grandpa," she begged. "I'll think of something." An inquisitive or curious calf came bounding across the barnyard to see what was going on. It would be dreadful if he got through the gate. Emily would never be able to catch him in that big field, and Grandpa really would run out of gas while she tried. She put one hand on the gatepost and the other on the gate. The calf frolicked over and nuzzled her with his moist nose. "Shoo!" she cried. "Go away!" The farmer came out of the barn with a pitchfork in his hands. "What the Sam Hill's going on in here?" he yelled, dropping the pitchfork and running toward Emily. "Don't stop, Grandpa," pleaded Emily, as the calf licked her face with his long, wet tongue. "I'll ask the man to open the gate." "What are you driving around in my oats for?" demanded the farmer. "I can't stop," yelled Grandpa. "I'll never get her started again." "Please open the gate for us," begged Emily, shoving at the calf with her foot. If only the farmer would help them out. The farmer began to laugh. "Beat it, Buttercup," he said, slapping the calf on the rump. Then he opened the gate for Emily. "Oh, thank you," said Emily with great feeling. "Thank you ever so much." She hoped she was doing a good job of thanking the farmer. If Grandpa felt he had to thank him too, he might think he had to stop. No, it was all right. Grandpa was circling the barnyard, skillfully avoiding 3 chickens and the bounding Buttercup. The farmer stood watching Emily with something like admiration as she leaped to the running board when Grandpa drove by. "Thank you," she called again, to make sure as she flopped into the seat. "Thank you, sir," Grandpa yelled above the noise of the engine. "You're welcome," the farmer yelled back. "Next time, get a horse." Gracious! Emily hoped the farmer did not get to town often. She did not want this adventure to get around Pitchfork. Grandpa would never hear the last of it, and Mama might not let her go driving again. "Yes, sir, Emily," said Grandpa as they headed back toward Pitchfork. "I always said you were a humdinger." The ride back to town was peaceful enough, although Emily was a little nervous lest they meet a cow in the middle of the road that might force them to stop. It would be awful if they had to stop now after all she had been through. When they came to Main Street, she said, "I can walk home from the store, Grandpa, as easy as not." "All right, Emily," agreed Grandpa. "You know, I have a feeling your mother might not think too highly of what went on this morning. Probably I shouldn't have let you do it. Maybe we had better keep it a secret, you and me." "Yes, let's," agreed Emily, who was happy that Grandpa wasn't going to tell either. Secrets were fun, and she was pleased that she and Grandpa had one all their own to share. "Whoa!" cried Grandpa, stopping in front of the store, just as if there was nothing wrong with his Model T. Old George A. Barbie would be only too happy to tell him how to fix it. When Emily climbed out with Mrs. Scott's 3 books and the bouquet of columbine, she discovered her legs felt wobbly. "Thank you for the ride, Grandpa," she said, not feeling the least bit like a humdinger. Grandpa's eyes twinkled. "Thank you, Emily. I don't know what I'd have done without you." He meant it, too. Emily walked home on shaky legs. No running or skipping this morning. She found Mama on the back porch doing the washing, which seemed surprising until Emily realized that it was only mid-morning, even though she felt as if she had been gone a long, long time. "What lovely columbine!" Mama smiled over the ringer. "Did you have a nice ride, Emily?" "Yes, Mama." Wearily, Emily sat down on the back steps to rest. "But, Mama, I don't think many people will want to read Mrs. Scott's donation." "Oh, that's too bad." Mama folded a pair of overalls so they would go through the ringer. "And, Mama," said Emily, "the most exciting thing happened. I was waved at by an aviator. An airplane flew over, and I waved at him, and he waved back." "Why, Emily, that's the second airplane that has been around here this year." Mama guided the overalls into a wash tub of rinse water. "Just think, it was only about 75 years ago that your pioneer ancestors came here by covered wagon. And now your grandfather is driving his automobile, and airplanes are flying over." She fished another pair of overalls from the suds in the washing machine. "Emily, your grandfather is right. Times are changing, and he is right to keep up with them, even at his age." As Emily bent over to examine her skinned knee, she could not help thinking that it had been all she could do to keep up with Grandpa's Tin Lizzie. And that's the end of Chapter 4.